Hello, everyone. I am Melinda Epler, founder and CEO of Change Catalyst and author of How to Be an Ally. I'm your host of Leading with Empathy and Allyship. Welcome. Allyship is about learning, showing empathy, and taking action. That process often includes learning, unlearning, and relearning, then building empathy for people with different experiences, and above all, taking consistent action. So each week we'll learn from somebody new. Please be open to new ways of thinking and understanding. You can learn more about my work and sign up to join us for a live recording at ally.cc. Let's get started. Welcome, everyone. Today, our guest is Pabel Martinez, founder and CEO of Plurawl. He's a native New Yorker, a storyteller, and a former tech executive. And our discussion today will focus on redefining professionalism. Pabel and I will challenge your beliefs about professionalism. We'll talk about how biases about professionalism move people to cover their identity, to reduce authenticity, and ultimately to reduce our ability to do our work well. And then we'll talk about how we can redefine professionalism, ways to create happier, healthier, more innovative, and more productive teams, humans, selves. So welcome, Pabel. How are you?
Thank you. I'm feeling excited to just have this very important conversation.
Fantastic. Me too. So before we jump in, for our YouTube audience, will you just join me in describing ourselves for anybody who's blind or low vision? And I can start. I am a white woman. I have long red hair with some blonde highlights, and I'm wearing glasses. I'm wearing a cream-colored sweater today. And then in my background on one side is the plants surrounding my book, How to Be an Ally, with a bright orange cover. And on the other side is a tall, narrow bookshelf with a plant cascading down and books from the different guests who have joined us over the last few years.
Well, you have admittedly a much nicer background than I do. I have a plain bluish gray background. It's a new setup in the office, but here we are. Nice. I'm a Black man, family from the Dominican Republic. I have a thick beard and mustache that I haven't shaved. I've trimmed a few times, but I haven't shaved in like 5 years. And a low Caesar haircut, black hair.
Nice.
With large headphones on and a burgundy sweater.
Awesome. Thank you. So our ASL interpreters today are Ruby and Tiara, and they're from Interpreter Now, our partners, our amazing partners. You can learn more about them at interpreter-now.com. So to begin, tell us a bit about your story. Where did your journey start? How did you end up here doing the work that you do around professionalism and authenticity?
For sure. I mean, for me, it started in New York City, where I was born and raised. And it's interesting because when people talk about New York City, they often talk about it or refer to it as a melting pot, right? It's a phrase that's kind of like thrown out there pretty often. But when referring to the melting pot, people often refer to it from a cultural standpoint. But I think New York City is one of the rare places where it's also a melting pot of incomes. To give you perspective, like I grew up in public housing, but in the wealthiest zip codes, one of the wealthiest zip codes in America, in the Upper West Side. So my mom never made more than $30,000, but I lived down the street from Macaulay Culkin. Wow. So it was this interesting dynamic where, like, in this huge 18th floor building, everybody around me was in poverty, but I go down the street and it's like, shit, I want to live where they live. So I never really knew what I wanted to do growing up, but I knew I wanted to make money and I was willing to do anything it took to get there. Almost anything.
So what did you do then? How did you start your career?
So I studied economics in college with the idea that I ultimately wanted to study investment banking. Not that I was particularly interested in the banking field, but something about seeing people dressed up, like men in suits, for example, I think I just really respected them. I looked up to them. And for a couple of reasons. One, I was like, oh my God, this person is well dressed. And I think society trained me to believe that like how you dress equates to a certain level of status. But also I'm like, banking they make money, right? All right, cool. Let me go into that. I was just like, I just
In New
thought
York, yeah, you see, there's a
exactly.
huge
New York
wealth
used to
gap.
be
Yeah.
a big finance capital. It still is. So that's just kind of like where my mind was. It was kind of just based on representation that I saw in movies and whatnot.
Mm. And so how did you end up from there to doing the work that you do now?
Yeah, a few things. I remember one time I was going on an interview after school, like after college, in a suit, and it was like 100 degrees. And I'm New York City subway. It is hot, so I'm there
Mhm.
glistening, and I'm just like, I hate wearing suits. Like, why am I doing this? Also, for perspective, like I went to Catholic school my entire life, so even when I in high school, all boys Catholic high school, we had to wear khakis and dress shoes and a blazer and a tie, all of that. So I'm just like, I've done this for too long. But also, I remember being in college and thinking about where I wanted to study, and I just looked at my phone and the apps that I had, and I was just like, hmm, I use Facebook it every day. Why not try to work there? you know. And the appealing thing for tech was this what I would call illusion or what they would call a promise of the idea that anyone could be their most authentic self. It's often even touted in one of their values. So I was like, all right, finance, I'm gonna try it because I want to make money, but ultimately, like I don't even know if I'm gonna be comfortable rocking suits every day. So at least maybe long term, tech is the place for me. So eventually, I landed a role at Facebook. It just took a while.
Awesome. And then from there, yeah, yeah. So from there, you worked there at Facebook for a while, and then did you jump off? And what made you do the work that you do now? How did you
Yeah,
get there? Yeah.
yeah. So I mean, earlier when I mentioned like I'll do anything it takes to sort of like get the job that I've always dreamed of. In college, like my dream was to go to Facebook, and I was like, eventually I'm gonna do. I applied in college, I didn't get it, but I looked at the job description as like a goal. I was like, oh no, no, no wonder I didn't get it. They want 5 years of experience in Excel. They want 5 years of experience doing this. I was like, every job I'm gonna get is gonna be a stepping stone till I get that job at Facebook. So when I got to Facebook, I was like, yo, whatever y'all need, y'all gonna have to drag me out of here because I'm gonna retire here. This place is
Mhm.
amazing. I'm talking about free breakfast, lunch, dinner, perks galore. Like the headquarters, they got a nail salon, they got gyms everywhere. They got, I mean, they do your laundry for you. It's crazy. So for me, like part of the idea of like doing whatever it takes is just like I started to lose part of myself in the process of
Hmm.
you walk into a place and like I said, I'm black, I'm Hispanic, Latino. Tech industry is like 3% black, another 3% Latino. There's not that many people that look like me. So the story that I told myself was in order to fit in, I wasn't going to be accepted being myself. So I did a lot of assimilation. And in that assimilation process, I started like losing myself in who I was. And it just became overwhelming.
Hmm. And you moved from there to TikTok, yeah, and then
I do. Yeah. And at TikTok, it was an interesting point because at TikTok, I was past that assimilation phase and I was like very comfortable being my most authentic self. But in some of the decisions that I made in how to display my authenticity, it was met with some resistance. And I'm happy to get into some examples, but
yeah.
that was at a point where again I was really comfortable in my skin and in my authenticity, which was very different from where I was before, which is like I'll do anything it takes to stay here. I didn't care about getting fired. Not that I wanted to get fired, but I was comfortable. I was so comfortable in myself that if they didn't accept me, I was comfortable stepping away from it and doing my
Oh
own
wow.
thing.
So that's a big jump. That's a big change over
It,
time.
it is. And it's something that I often tell people. Like somebody reached out to me this week. It was like, yo, if I want to start my content creation journey, like what advice would you give me? And I told them, you got to let go of the fear of being fired if you truly want to be authentic. Because
Mm,
somewhere somebody at work is going to have a problem with you creating content, no matter what it's about.
yeah. Yeah. If you're truly authentic. Yeah. Can you share a bit about what you do now? What does that look like? What does Plural do?
Yeah. So I launched Plurawl in 2020 as a lifestyle company selling art and apparel. with the mission of redefining professionalism. Since then, we've launched an award-winning podcast that's in the top 2% of all podcasts globally. And it's because some of these unspoken stories are finally being spoken about publicly. And what we're in the process of doing now is really taking what we've learned in the podcast and using it as validation for the technology that we're going to be launching this year. So, I've been working with various companies. Last year, I was working with like Salesforce and Google and Spotify, Amazon, bunch of different companies in teaching them and about authenticity in the workplace. Now we're launching technology to really scale that impact because I'm just one person.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about maybe we could start with defining professionalism. What is professionalism?
So professionalism is funny because it has a definition, yet I think all of us have this idea of what it means in our head, right? Growing up, my grandfather, he would tell me, like, do you see presidents and CEOs with beards and tattoos and do-rags and earrings? No. So I had to dress accordingly. You know what I mean? But what he was also telling me indirectly was that if I wanted to be successful, I needed to be more like an older white man based on the representation he was showing me, right? So when I say that I was like assimilating in corporate, I was trying to do my best version of a white man. I was trying to act, dress, and do my best version of being a white man. But when you look at the definition of professionalism, which is what I'm trying to educate the world on, is that it just means the skill or competence expected of a professional. That's it. It has nothing to do with how you look.
So the skills, it's really about the skills, not how you look. Yes. Yeah, and professionalism, I think you when you were walking through the streets of New York and saw the financial, the bankers, the investment bankers, you saw the suits, you saw success. Yeah.
Exactly. And I do a lot of speaking engagements around this very topic. And it's not like, yeah, like you'd be just surprised about like what I found is that everyone has their own definition of professionalism. And it's because like we all have our bias because of our lived experiences, which is fine. I'm just trying to help people realize that we all have bias.
And so let's talk about the consequences to you and kind of in general too. What are the consequences of us kind of having those biases around professionalism, internalizing them? When we internalize them, that's when we start to cover aspects of our identity or code switch or, other ways that we can internalize and also externalize as a result. That assimilation there's a lot of ways that can take hold on us.
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example. Like I love going to cafes, right? Coffee shops. I'm biased when it comes to baristas. It's a bias that I'm working on, but I prefer my barista to look like a hipster from Brooklyn. I'm talking about, just looking homeless, like tattoos, piercings, the better. The more, the better. Like if I walk into a cafe and the barista looks like my mom, I used to walk out because I'm like, this person doesn't look like they can make a latte. I'm accustomed to my people that look like my mom making coffee a certain way, drip style coffee with a mocha pot or greca, as we call it in Dominican Republic. I'm not used to her making lattes, right? But who says that how you look has anything to do with how well you make a latte? If anything, the machine does most of the work. But I used to literally turn around. Like, that's what happens in a lot of these employment situations. We make split decisions based on how people like instead of giving them an opportunity to make a latte.
And so how did that impact you as you got to Facebook, your dream job? Gonna live there forever, gonna work there and live there forever because you can pretty much do all of that at Facebook. How did that show up for you?
Yeah, well, what I try to tell people is that assimilating and code switching, like people think it's so simple, but it's a very time consuming activity. I'll give you an example as well. Like I was assimilating to the point where I was literally studying white popular American culture. Like, instead of watching TV shows that I cared about or was interested in, I would literally binge watch shows like Riverdale. I would like like it's
To
ridiculous, right?
learn how to
And
assimilate.
what I try to tell people is that there's nothing wrong with expanding your preferences. Like, white people have put me onto some of my favorite shit in the world. Brussels sprouts, love Brussels sprouts. Sushi, love sushi. And this isn't white people shit, but I'm just saying what white people put me onto.
Mhm.
Seinfeld, love it. Office, love it. But there becomes a point where you try something you don't enjoy and you continue to do it for the sole purpose of being accepted. Right? Because when I say what I do on the weekends, which is nothing illegal, like I go out salsa dancing, like I go out to certain clubs and pop bottles and smoke hookah, like, but it's things and activities that other people don't do, so it becomes an end of a conversation. Versus if I try to assimilate, it would continue the conversation. But that faking it only lasts so long, and it was at the detriment of my performance. So I was pretty close to like either quitting my dream job or being fired in that first year. To like, after when I stopped assimilating, I did not get a performance review that wasn't exceeding expectations.
And this is not you alone. I just, for those of you listening or watching, that almost half of LGBTQIA plus folks cover pieces of the aspects of their identity at work. And 2/3 of people with disabilities cover at work. Code switching. There was a study that showed that 48% of Black college students feel the need to code switch regularly. Right. So this is something, and I learned from you that the Latinos also, I think you said 76%, is that right?
Yes.
Of Latinos or Latinx folks suppress parts of their identity at work. So this is something that happens a lot to people with underrepresented identities. There's a pressure, and I think you said also when you were applying, you know, even in that application process and that kind of proving that you can be successful, that you can do the role, there's a huge amount of pressure to assimilate or cover or code switch.
Oh, for sure. Like I said, there's not that many people in the office that look like me. So the story that I tell myself is like, well, I have to do all I can to be successful, because if I'm not, then they're not going to hire someone else that looks like me. Right. Because
Mm-hmm.
back to that association that I make of people that look like my mom only being able to make drip coffee and not being able to make a latte. That's what I tell myself about, like, oh, well, damn, all salespeople that we hire are Black or from this school or from this neighbor, whatever the fuck it is. Ooh, sorry. Whatever it is, they're not capable or they're not worthy. So it's a ton of pressure. And
Yeah.
I know and I know I'm not alone.
Yeah, yeah. And the other things that kind of you said in there that people might recognize, the tokenism, right? That feeling of not just being the only, but also feeling the weight of being the only and feeling like you have to succeed so that other people like you can have that opportunity and are able to have that opportunity.
And because of that pressure to succeed, but you got to think about what success means, right? Success means like you get money for yourself and your family. Like, I was at a point at TikTok where I was supporting myself and my mom, not because she needs it, but because I wanted to, right? So because of that pressure, a lot of us are comfortable giving up parts of ourselves in order to get to that point of success, whatever it is for anybody, right? We all have different metrics for success. But what I want people to realize is that you're not going to do your best work until you stop faking it. But we don't realize that. Like, we just keep telling ourselves, no, we have to do that, because it's that cycle of, all right, nobody looks like me, assimilate. Then I get tired. Then I realize, you know what I mean? Then I realize it's a waste of time. But
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
yeah,
consequences are burnout, are lower engagement, lower productivity, because it's extra work. It's extra cognitive work, emotional work. And when you're not able to be your full authentic self, I'll just say that. If you're not able to be your authentic self, uh, it's working against yourself in some way. There's that friction against yourself that is internally not easy emotionally.
it's not. And then there's the piece of, all right, maybe eventually you do build the confidence to be yourself. Then it's like, well, how are people going to receive me though?
Mm.
And that's when you get into the unfortunate stories of the unfortunate stories that honestly often don't get told. And these are the stories that I'm really passionate about telling. It's like a lot of the stories of the racism, the sexism, the microaggressions, they go untold, or where they are told, they're told anonymously out of fear
Mm.
for things like retaliation. So I'm proud of being like one of the only platforms where there is a face and a name to each story um, of these instances.
It's so once you overcome that fear, you can be more authentic and more courageous and tell those stories. And it ultimately benefits us all to do that. And so maybe you could talk about, we talked a little bit about what professionalism is and how we perceive it and the biases that we have around it, as well as the impacts of it. How do we change it? What is the new definition, or how do we redefine
Yeah,
professionalism?
I
Yeah.
actually love the current definition. I just don't think we use it in practice. So I think it takes a lot of education, and it's education for everybody. Like, I think when people talk about bias and, education around discrimination, all these kind of things, like people automatically assume like it's only white people that need to be educated. Couldn't be further from the truth. There's so much education that comes within our own communities, probably even more starts, because this idea of the need to assimilate, I didn't learn at work. My family taught me. Like, my
Hmm.
family taught me in order to be successful, I need to fake it. Every day, my mom getting ready for work, she would straighten her curls to the point now where they don't curl anymore. So my grandfather and the advice that he would give me. So it starts at home and eventually just gets reiterated in places like school and organizations, but it takes a lot of education. I'll give you an example as well. Like a lot of speaking engagements that I do, one of the first slides that I that I have is I put up a picture of the musician, the entrepreneur Lil Wayne. And there he is with face tattoos all over his face, his neck, these huge chains. He has locks, dreads. And I ask a simple question. I'm like, is anything about how he looks unprofessional? There are black women in the crowd that would say, yes, I would never hire someone that looks like him. So to say that it's only a certain group of people, I think would be unfair. I think everyone needs to really like reevaluate their biases.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that is we have collectively internalized and made normal a lot of things around a lot of biases, a lot of sexist, racist ways of thinking and being as we navigate the world. And yeah, there's a lot that we all have to undo, even, you know, when we're internalizing it. That's a piece of that. That's a piece of believing it fundamentally and needing to unlearn and relearn and then recreate ourselves. Or how did you get out of it? How did you
Yeah.
move through it?
I think education coupled with like representation. I mean, you often hear the quote of, you can't be what you can't see. And yeah, like sometimes people need to see people that look like them being their most authentic self to be like, oh, wait, that's possible. Right. For example, there's so many like unspoken rules when it comes to professionalism. Like, there's not like a signed law or like an internal policy that says like you can't do certain things. We've just been made to believe that that's the case. I'll give you an example. At my previous job, there was one day where I posted my salary transparently on LinkedIn. It was my whole compensation package, from my base to my bonus, my signing bonus, my stock options, everything. And people were like, "Oh, you could do that? Like, isn't that illegal? Are you gonna get fired?" Like, all these sort of like, what are you doing? Why would you do that? All these sort of things. And no, like, it's against the law to fire somebody for that. Obama passed a law or a policy to protect employees from having those type of conversations. The only reason that employers have been telling us not to do is because it benefits them. If we don't talk about it openly, they're allowed by nature to pay us different rates, which is why we have a lot of things like the wage gaps with different groups.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it takes that representation to then create that education as well.
What else kind of moves people from, like, I will say that I have internalized in lots of different ways. Imposter syndrome, I think, is a level of this as well, of not feeling like I reflect that professionalism to the full extent that I should, or whatever that is. And so for me, it's been therapy. It's been a lot of that internal work, a lot of meditation, a lot of leadership coaching, and so on. And I think it still percolates up in different ways. How do we, when you're working with folks, how do you help move them through that? What are some of the ways?
Yeah, it's a difficult process. Like you said, it takes a lot of internal work. It takes a lot of emotional intelligence as well, which is something that I think in certain communities is frowned upon, discouraged, and not necessarily seen for the benefit that it really is. But a lot of the skills, most valuable skills when it comes to emotional intelligence, which Harvard Business Review recently put out a study and said 90% of what sets high performers apart from their peers with similar technical experience is emotional intelligence, which is crazy. 90%. With a skill that seems so necessary for success, it's rarely taught within institutions. I learned it in therapy. So if you look at the four components of emotional intelligence, right? It's self-awareness, social awareness, self-management, and relationship management. Like, I think mastering those four components is key. But for me, it starts with self-awareness, which is why it's the first question that I actually ask everyone on the podcast. I literally ask people, what does the word authenticity mean to you? And it means something different to everybody. And it's a very unique individual answer. So it's not like I can tell you what your most authentic self looks like, acts like, speaks like. And figuring that out for oneself is, I think, the first step in being able to do that. Because once you know what you want to project to the world, then you can do things like look for the representation that you're needed, for the permission, et cetera, and work on some of those other steps. But yeah, I've learned some interesting things in asking people that question over 100 times.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would also say you talked about acting earlier, and a part of mindfulness training it is to notice, to notice when things come up, right? So to notice, you could use that in terms of walking into your authentic self, or walking more authentically, is to notice, when are you acting? When notice, take the time to stop and notice those moments where you are incongruent in some way, or it doesn't feel quite like you. Yeah.
Yes. Sometimes it even in some episodes, I've actually heard people, I was like, what was that moment for you where you were finally forget all of this acting, I'm going to be myself? And some people were like, it took someone else to call it out for me, because I didn't see it in myself. In fact, I remember when I was at Facebook during that first year having a really tough time, I cried to my aunt in her shoulder at one time in my mom's apartment. And she was asking me what's wrong? Why are you having such a difficult time? And I was talking about the assimilation, the code switching. And she asked me such a simple question that I couldn't even answer. She was like, okay, it's overwhelming. So why are you doing it? And all I could say was I thought I had to. I thought I had to act. I thought I had to do all this to be accepted. And many of us don't recognize that we're even wasting this much time and how much of an impact it's having on us, because we just think we have to. We think it's part of the process of becoming successful.
So there are multiple components to redefining professionalism, or kind of rethinking professionalism, and getting back to the definition of professionalism. One is that internal work for those of us who have internalized, and so that we can become more authentic at work, outside of work. Also, there's a role that managers and leaders have too, right? What are some things that, if you're a people manager, that you can do to kind of redefine it yourself so that you can help your team create the space for people, safe space for people to become their more authentic selves?
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I think there's like two sides to that equation of the solution. There's the individual and empowering them to be their most authentic self and unlearning, relearning all those things. For the institution, if you will, a lot of these companies, organizations, I think they have an opportunity to create policies to help their employees feel more comfortable in whatever that authenticity is, right? I think there's a lot of policies that are already being worked on that have been instituted within some organizations or some states that others can just adopt. But I think a great starting point is simply asking your team that question of, what does authenticity mean to you? In that simple question, they'll start sharing a very personalized viewpoint on what it is. Then ask them, when do you feel most comfortable? And then when do you feel uncomfortable being that person? In some of these speaking engagements, I'll give you an example. There have been employees that said, this is what my authenticity means. I feel really comfortable bringing that person to the office, but I feel uncomfortable in front of clients. That's an insight. Okay, well, is it something about the client? Is it because you feel additional pressure in these external facing meetings? But you get to really start understanding your employees and building policies around that. That said, there's a ton of policies right now that I think would make people feel safe. I mean, you think about like LGBTQ plus community, the fact that it had to go up to the Supreme Court, a couple of years ago? And even these days, there's still a lot of uncomfortableness around that. There are policies these days that still force many Black individuals to cut their hair, change their appearance, just because it's not deemed quote unquote neat or professional. I posted a video this week of, I think it was a representative from Missouri, how they just passed a new policy that like women have to wear blazers when entering, like they have to essentially like cover their arms. It's a fascinating thing, but there's a ton of policies like this. But I think starting with authenticity and then creating policies around that, I think would be helpful as well.
Yeah, yeah. And when we were talking earlier, once before, you mentioned the difference between uncomfortable versus unprofessional. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to think of an example that comes to mind. Yeah, I mean, I've seen in the news a lot lately, teachers, sometimes middle school, high school, being fired over the fact that they have an OnlyFans account. And for people that don't know what OnlyFans is, it's essentially this subscription service where you subscribe directly to a creator, like a monthly fee. It could be $5, could be $25, whatever the creator decides. Now, what you receive most often on this website is pornography. And there's this idea of, is it unprofessional for a teacher to be creating pornography content on his or her free time? Again, based on the definition, I don't think that takes away from the skills or the competence needed for that teacher to go on with a lesson and teach math, science, whatever the hell they're teaching to their students. Now, does it make some people uncomfortable? The fact that their son or daughter's teacher, professor is making that type of content offline? Yeah, maybe. But why is all the blame being put on that individual? Like, why aren't you blaming your son or daughter for watching it? You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's the difference between like professionalism and, I'm sorry, like being unprofessional versus just being uncomfortable about someone's appearance and what they do on the weekends.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And even your example with Lil Wayne too, right? Is the tattoos, is that make you uncomfortable, or is that unprofessional?
Here's one.
Yeah.
Whenever I put up a picture of Lil Wayne and I give the reference of like, oh, well, imagine this person's in sales. The response that I typically get is very like deflective. Like the people in the audience will say, Oh, well, like, I don't care. I'm so open-minded. I'm worried about my clients or what they would think. Okay.
Mm,
So in that case, you're not saying he's unprofessional. What you're saying is that you're uncomfortable about the idea of him presenting to your clients because you're not sure what their reaction is going to be. At the end of the day, you like if you're telling me that Lil Wayne is unprofessional, what you're telling me is that you don't think that someone that looks like him has the needed skill or competence expected for that role, which goes back to the problem again of us making decisions based on how someone looks.
hmm hmm If you could, if you could tell a leader um, three things that they should do or could do to create safe spaces for their teams to really be their most authentic selves, what would those three things be?
Yeah, maybe it's work on your own emotional intelligence first so that you can work on skills like empathy, self-awareness, social awareness, like all of those things. Yeah, you know what? Step 1, work on your own emotional intelligence first. 2, start building trust with your team by being that representation that they're looking for. And I think by you starting to be vulnerable, starting to stand up for the causes that they care about, then you can start having conversations with them around what does authenticity mean to you. Maybe they'll start opening up to you.
Hmm. I like that. I like that.
Sorry, I had to think through that one.
That's cool. That's I love it. I love it. Yeah, I think that is really important. You have to, and that part of that trust, I think, is showing empathy and also modeling authenticity, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have to model that authenticity yourself as a leader, and vulnerability is a part of authenticity.
100%. I was like, oh, you know what? They get it. Maybe I could talk to them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Awesome. At the end of each of our episodes, I always ask our guests. You know, this is a podcast where people learn, they unlearn, they relearn, and they take action. Right? That's focus on solutions, focus on taking action one step at a time. And so, from our conversation today, what action would you like people to take, whether they're listening or watching?
I mean, my gut reaction is like telling people to listen to the podcast. And it's not for like self promotion. It's more so just people have told me that they've learned a lot from it. Either you see yourself in the episodes or you don't and you learn something from it. So it's either an opportunity to feel seen or it's an opportunity to learn and be like, oh, I didn't know that people hid those kind of things.
Mm.
And
Where can people find it?
it's everywhere, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, as well as YouTube.
And they'll need to search for Plurawl, Plurawl, correct?
Yes,
Okay,
it's called Quien tú eres, and despite the name, it's all in English.
got it. Okay, awesome. What's the most surprising thing that you've learned in doing? How many episodes have you done?
100,
100.
101 or something. Yeah.
Awesome. What's the most surprising thing you've learned?
The most surprising thing that I've learned is the differences in what we hide. I walked into a situation knowing that I hid a lot of cultural aspects about myself, but a lot of what people hide has nothing to do with their like cultural background. It's just like human things. For example, I had a mom on the podcast that said that she hid the fact that she was a mom from her clients.
Hmm.
And I didn't understand that at first. I was like, why would you hide that? But it's this perception of like moms aren't fun. If I say I'm a mom, they're not going to invite me out for that beer. If I don't get invited out for the beer, then I can't build relationships. And that's how you get promoted, right? Anything from that to like me being a straight man, I don't know what it's like to self-identify as queer, right? So for people to come on the podcast and say, I had a hard time finding a job after college because most of my experience came from like, these school clubs. There's like a finance club. People were in the like LGBTQ plus club, and this person was like a treasurer. They didn't feel comfortable putting that on their resume because it outed them, which is scary. And there's just like things that just because of the many yet small number of identities that I hold, I can't have all these perspectives. So it's a learning experience for me in every episode, even finding out like either the things that people hide or the things that they're met with resistance about when they finally are comfortable being themselves.
Yeah, when I have learned a lot too about covering and code switching and different ways that people assimilate too over the years of doing tech inclusion conferences and career fairs, which we did for a number of years to bring the tech industry together to focus on solutions to diversity and inclusion. And there was I think in 2016, I really wanted to. I had learned a lot about inclusion for deaf people, mostly because somebody who was deaf came to our very first conference and said, "Hey, you need to bring ASL interpreters here, and you need to pay for them." And then from there, we became friends. I learned a lot about him, and we even created an ability in tech conference to really focus on solutions to diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically for people with disabilities in tech. And one of the things that I found is, as I was trying to create a deaf in tech panel, is how many deaf people are covering their identity at work. I had no idea, and it seemed to be that the people who had different intersectional identities tended to cover more. So women who are deaf, women of color who are deaf, and so on. And it was, and I met a man who ended up coming out as deaf and Latino on stage for the first time, who had been covering both of those aspects of who he is. So I think for some people, it was surprising to me over the years as well, how many different people cover different aspects of who they are. And I suspect it will be surprising to some listeners and watchers of this episode too. Just there are people who navigate the world and don't really cover very much at all about who they are. And those are the people that we tend to imagine when we think of professional, right? Not always. Often folks, white men too, are covering pieces of who they are as well. And that there are a lot of people with traditionally marginalized, systemically marginalized identities that cover a lot of who they are. Imagine how different the world would be without that covering. Yeah.
Agreed with everything.
Where can people learn more about you and your work?
So you can find me on all the social media handles are at Plurawl, and find me on LinkedIn at Pabel Martinez. I post a lot of daily content there.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for this conversation and for being you and doing the work that you do.
Thank you. Appreciate your time.
All right, everybody, take care. Please do take at least one action after listening or watching, and we will see you next week. We'll share resources and a transcript from this discussion at ally.cc. And please make sure to subscribe to our channel and rate this show. It makes a difference for us. Thank you for being part of our community. And remember, the more we take action, the more we grow as humans and as leaders, and the more we transform our communities. So what action will you take today? Let us know your actions by emailing podcast@changecatalyst.co or reaching out on social media. And Leading with Empathy and Allyship is a show by Change Catalyst where we build inclusive innovation through training, consulting, and events. You can learn more about us at changecatalyst.co. So let's keep building allyship across our communities and around the world. Thank you for listening.